The Empire had conquered 347 worlds across the galaxy. Their warships blocked out the stars wherever they traveled. Their soldiers moved like shadows through conquered cities. Their reputation made entire civilizations surrender before a single shot was fired. When their massive fleet appeared above Earth in the summer of 2089, humanity prepared for the worst day in its history. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the blue and green planet spinning slowly beneath him. His four eyes blinked in sequence as he studied the primitive world. His intelligence officers had given him complete reports on these humans. They were soft creatures. They fought among themselves constantly. They had barely reached their own moon and had no weapons that could scratch armor. This conquest would take perhaps 3 days. Maybe 4 if the humans proved slightly more stubborn than expected. They had a simple system for conquest. They would demonstrate their power by destroying a few major cities. Then they would land their ground forces. The surviving population would be sorted into categories. The strong would become workers. The intelligent would become servants. The rest would be processed for biological resources. It was efficient. It was proven. It had worked on 347 worlds without failure. Gave the order to begin. The first landing ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like metal rain. 10,000 soldiers in the first wave. They expected panic. They expected humans running through streets and screaming for mercy. They expected the same thing they had seen on every world they had ever conquered. What they found was different. The humans did not run. They watched the ships land with strange expressions on their faces. Some of them were actually recording the event on small devices. Others stood in groups and pointed at the soldiers emerging from the ships. A few humans even walked closer to get a better look. Watched this strange behavior from his bridge monitors. He felt the first small touch of confusion. Why were these creatures not afraid? Did they not understand what was happening? The ground commander, a veteran named L, organized his troops and began moving through the streets of the first target city. The humans moved aside but did not flee. Some of them asked questions that the translation devices struggled to interpret. Others offered the soldiers strange food items and colorful drinks. L reported this unusual behavior too. The commander dismissed it as primitive ignorance. These humans simply did not understand the danger they faced. Once the demonstrations of power began, they would learn fear like every other species. But something else was happening to the soldiers, something none of them expected. The air of Earth tasted different. It carried scents and particles that lungs had never processed before. The gravity was slightly stronger than there, making their movements feel heavier but somehow more grounded. The sunlight touched their gray skin with warmth they had never experienced, and the sounds of this world filled their ears constantly. Birds singing, wind moving through trees, the endless variety of human voices speaking and laughing and calling to each other. After just 6 hours on Earth's surface, El noticed something strange in his soldiers. They were moving more slowly. They were looking around at everything with wide eyes. Several of them had stopped their patrol to watch a group of human children playing in a park. The children were kicking a round ball and laughing. The soldiers watched this simple activity as if it was the most fascinating thing in the universe. El shouted at his troops to focus on their mission. They obeyed, but their movements were uncertain now. Their legendary discipline seemed to be softening at the edges. By the end of the first day, received a troubling report. None of his ground forces had established control over any territory. They had walked through many human settlements, but they had not actually conquered anything. The soldiers kept getting distracted. They kept stopping to examine plants and animals and human artifacts. Several units had simply sat down in green areas called parks and refused to move for hours. Ordered more troops to the surface. Perhaps the first wave had encountered some kind of chemical weapon that affected their minds. Fresh soldiers would complete the mission. The second wave landed. Within 12 hours, they showed the same symptoms as the first. The medical officers could not explain what was happening. The soldiers were not sick. Their bodies were actually functioning better than normal. Their stress levels had dropped dramatically. Their aggressive hormones had decreased to levels never recorded in history. They were not being poisoned. They were being healed. Earth, the doctors realized with growing horror, was doing something to their species that no other world had ever done. It was making them feel good. It was making them feel peaceful. It was making them feel things that were not supposed to feel. The humans, meanwhile, continued their strange behavior. They approached the soldiers without fear. They offered them food and drink. They showed them pictures and played them music. They asked questions about space and other planets. They treated the invaders like interesting visitors rather than dangerous conquerors. Commander descended to the surface himself on the third day. He needed to understand what was happening to his army. He needed to restore order and complete the conquest. The moment he stepped out of his shuttle, Earth reached out and grabbed him. The smell of ocean salt carried on warm wind. The sight of clouds moving across an impossibly blue sky. The sound of waves crashing against a distant shore. The feeling of sand beneath his feet. These sensations flooded his ancient mind with something he had never experienced. For the first time in his 200 years of life, felt at peace. He stood there for a very long time, just breathing. A human female approached him. She was small and soft and should have been trembling with fear. Instead, she smiled at him and offered him a cup of something warm and brown that smelled absolutely wonderful. Took the cup. He drank. The liquid was called coffee, and it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted in his entire existence. The conquest of Earth ended that afternoon, not because the humans had defeated the military, not because some secret weapon had been deployed. The conquest ended because they simply could not bring themselves to destroy this world. Within 1 week, every soldier on Earth had essentially become a tourist. They wandered through forests and deserts and mountains with expressions of wonder on their faces. They sat on beaches and watched sunsets that painted the sky in colors they had never known. They played with human children and pets. They tasted human food and listened to human music. The High Council received report with disbelief. They sent another fleet to replace him and complete the conquest. That fleet landed. Within 3 days, those soldiers were also wandering through Earth's natural wonders with the same peaceful expressions. The Council sent a third fleet, then a fourth, then a fifth. They all suffered the same fate. The humans, it turned out, had developed something far more powerful than weapons or shields or warships. They had developed a world so rich with sensation and beauty and life that anyone who visited could never bear to harm it. Earth was not a planet to be conquered. Earth was a planet that conquered the conquerors. They called for a full evacuation of all personnel from Earth. This is when they discovered the final truth of their situation. The soldiers refused to leave. Not because they were being held prisoner by the humans. The humans would have let them go. They refused because they could not imagine returning to their cold, gray after experiencing Earth. They could not imagine eating ration paste after tasting human cuisine. They could not imagine the silence of cities after hearing Earth's endless symphony of life. Commander sent one final message to the High Council. His words were recorded and studied by scholars for generations afterward. He said that they had conquered 347 worlds because those worlds had something they wanted: resources, labor, strategic positions. But Earth had something different. Earth had everything that made existence worth living. And now that they had tasted it, they would rather die than give it up. The humans welcomed their former invaders with the same strange warmth they had shown from the beginning. They helped them find places to live. They taught them about Earth's cultures and histories. They introduced them to pizza and ice cream and action movies and pets and holidays, and all the countless tiny pleasures that humans had created over thousands of years. The Empire eventually declared Earth a forbidden zone. Any who traveled there would never return. This was not a punishment. This was simply a fact. The Empire lost nearly 200,000 soldiers to Earth's strange power. They lost one of their greatest commanders. They lost ship after ship after ship. But the who stayed on Earth did not consider themselves lost. They considered themselves found. Years passed, then decades. The former conquerors learned to farm and build and create. They raised families with human partners. They watched their children grow up under blue skies and golden sunlight. They became part of the endless human story, adding their own chapters to it. Commander lived for another 300 years on Earth. He spent most of that time in a small house near the ocean, drinking coffee and watching waves and feeling the peace that had captured him on his first day. When he finally died, humans stood together at his funeral and remembered him not as a conqueror but as a friend. The empire eventually fell, as all empires do. Their conquered worlds broke free. Their military power crumbled. Their civilization scattered to the winds of history. But the of Earth remained. They were still there when humanity finally reached the stars. They traveled alongside their human companions to new worlds, always carrying with them the memory of how they had come to Earth as conquerors and stayed as prisoners of its beauty. Some species would have called this fate a tragedy. The proud, reduced to living among primitives on a backwater world, but they themselves knew the truth. They had spent their entire history conquering worlds that made them feel nothing. Then they found a world that made them feel everything. They had not been defeated by humanity. They had been saved by it. And they were grateful prisoners, locked forever in the most beautiful cage the universe had ever created. The end.